Hello there, and welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you found your way here today. We tend to think of hope as something soft, a kind of wishing that drifts at the edge of action, pleasant but powerless. It turns out the opposite is true. And before we begin, if these calm explorations are something you enjoy, consider liking and subscribing. It helps others find their way here too. Now let's begin. Picture someone standing at the foot of a mountain they mean to climb. Hope in that moment is not the daydream of the summit. It is two quieter things working together. The psychologist Charles Snyder spent decades studying this and found that hope measured carefully is built from a sense of pathways, the ability to see routes forward, and a sense of agency, the belief that you can walk them. One imagines the trail. The other says, "My legs can do this." Take away either, and the whole thing collapses into mere longing. What this means is simple and steadying. Hope is not something that happens to a person. It is something a person does quietly with the mind. Something strange happens in the brain the moment you look forward to something good. Long before it arrives, the body begins to respond as if it already had. Think of the small lift you feel planning a trip you won't take for months. The destination is nowhere near, yet something in you has already started to travel. Neuroscientists studying the brain's reward system have found that dopamine, the chemistry of motivation and pleasure, is released not only when we receive a reward, but in the act of anticipating one. The imagined future leaks into the present and changes the chemistry of now. The mind, in this sense, does not wait for good things to arrive before it begins to feel them. This is part of why hope can sustain a person through a barren stretch of life. The future they are reaching toward is not entirely a future. Some portion of it is already here, carried in the body, felt in advance. Have you ever noticed how the night before something you long for can feel almost as good as the thing itself? That is not an illusion. That is your brain drawing tomorrow gently into today. There is a hard truth that came out of one of the darkest places humans have ever made, and it is against all expectation, a hopeful one. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, and inside them, he watched something he could not unsee. Physical strength did not reliably predict who endured. Men who were robust, well-built, accustomed to hardship, sometimes faded and died, while others, frailer, kept going. What separated them, Frankl came to believe, was not the body, but the presence of a reason. A person waiting to finish a book they had begun. A man who needed to find a daughter again. Those who held a why to live, he wrote, could bear almost any how. The detail that stayed with him was how quickly a man declined once that thread was cut. When the future emptied, the body soon followed. It asks something quiet of each of us. Not to deny how heavy a life can become, but to notice that the thread we hold toward tomorrow may be doing more to carry us than we know. We imagine there must be a hierarchy of hopes, that the great ones, the life dreams, run on some deeper machinery than the small ones. The brain does not seem to make that distinction. Consider the ordinary pleasure of knowing there is coffee waiting in the morning, the cup you'll have by the window before the day begins. It feels too modest to matter. Yet when researchers look at how the brain handles anticipation, the same reward pathways light up for the small near pleasure as for the towering distant goal. The circuitry does not check the size of what you hope for. It only registers that something good is expected and responds. This is gentler news than it sounds. It means a person worn thin by hardship does not need a grand vision to keep the machinery of hope running. The smallest reachable thing will do. There is a quiet dignity in this. A life can be held together, day by day, on hopes that would look almost laughably small from the outside, and the body would not know the difference. Here is a question that sits at the center of everything we are exploring, and the honest answer is that no one has fully solved it. Imagine two people living through the same catastrophe, the same flood, the same loss, standing in what looks like identical wreckage. One rebuilds, the other cannot find a reason to lift the first stone. We would like to point to one clean cause, something in the upbringing, the temperament, the chemistry. Researchers who study resilience still aren't certain why hope holds in one person and slips from another under the very same weight. Genetics plays a part. So does early life and the people around us, and something harder to name, but no single factor predicts it cleanly. There is something honest in admitting this. Hope resists being fully reduced to a formula, which may be part of why it has never been used up, and there is a quiet comfort folded into the uncertainty. If no one can say for certain who will hold on, then no one can say for certain that you won't. Suppose you were given a pill with nothing in it and told it would help. You believe it, and then measurably you improve. This is not a trick of reporting. Something real happens in the flesh. The placebo effect is one of the most studied and most quietly astonishing findings in medicine. A person given an inert tablet, no active ingredient at all, can show genuine physiological change. Lowered pain, reduced inflammation shifts, the body itself registers, and the expectation of healing sets healing in motion. The brain, anticipating relief, releases its own chemistry to meet the belief part way. The effect is strong enough that every drug trial must measure against it, because hope alone moves the numbers. Sit with what that implies. The belief that you are about to get better is not merely a feeling laid over the body. It reaches into the body and changes it. This is perhaps the clearest evidence we have for something humans have always sensed. The line between what the mind expects and what the body does is far thinner than we were taught to believe. Long before a child has a single word for the future, they have already begun to expect one. It is built not from language, but from rhythm. Watch an infant whose mother steps out of the room and then comes back. Steps out, comes back. Again and again. Something is being learned in that simple repetition deeper than any lesson. Developmental researchers studying attachment have found that this reliable returning, the caregiver who leaves and reappears, is where a child's earliest sense of hopeful expectation takes root. The world becomes a place where absence is followed by presence, where what is gone can come back. The infant cannot say this, but the body learns it encoded in the nervous system before memory itself begins. This is where hope starts in a human life, not in an idea, but in the felt knowledge that what we need can return to us. Think back, if you can, to the steadiest presence of your early life. You will not remember the lesson, but somewhere in you the rhythm of their returning may still be quietly teaching you to expect tomorrow. We often use the two words as if they were interchangeable. They are not, and the difference matters most precisely when things look worst. Optimism is a forecast. It is the expectation that things will probably turn out well, a reading of the odds tilted toward the bright side. Hope is something stranger and tougher. Researchers who study the two as distinct states have found that hope does not depend on favorable odds at all. A person can look clearly at a poor prognosis, expect the worst as the likeliest outcome, and still hope. The optimist needs the numbers to lean their way. The hopeful person does not. This is why hope can stay standing in places optimism cannot reach. At a bedside in a cell, in the middle of a loss already underway, optimism has often packed up and left. Hope remains. There is a kind of courage in this that we rarely name. To hope without the cover of good odds, to reach forward while seeing the situation plainly, is one of the most quietly resilient things a human being can do. There is a small region buried in the brain whose job in part is to keep you from giving up too soon. It does its work quietly, every time you fail and try again. Imagine reaching for something just out of grasp, missing, adjusting, reaching once more. Behind that ordinary persistence sits the anterior cingulate cortex, a fold of tissue deep in the front of the brain. Among its many tasks, it monitors the gap between where you are and where you mean to be, and it helps keep effort directed toward the goal, even after the goal has refused you several times. It registers the error, holds the target, and signals the rest of the brain to keep adjusting rather than collapsing the attempt. What moves me about this is that persistence is not only a matter of character. Some of it is built into the architecture, a piece of us designed to keep reaching. So when you find yourself after a string of setbacks still somehow turning back toward the thing you want, understand that this is not naivety. It is a deep and ancient part of the brain doing precisely what it was shaped to do. Here is a finding that looks at first almost too practical to be moving. Then you sit with what it actually means for a life. Two patients receive the same diagnosis, the same plan, the same long road of treatment that asks them to keep showing up week after week when they are tired and afraid. Researchers studying recovery have found that those who score higher on measures of hope tend to stay with the treatment more steadily, taking the medication, keeping the appointments, doing the unglamorous daily work that healing actually requires. Hope in this sense is not a feeling that sits apart from the outcome. It is the thing that keeps a person walking the path long enough for the path to work. This reframes hope entirely. It is not wishful detachment from the hard work. It is what makes the hard work bearable enough to continue. The future a hopeful person believes in pulls them through the present they would otherwise want to escape. And so the believing and the surviving turn out to be quietly, mechanically the same act. There is a clue hidden inside the word itself, a trace of how our ancestors understood what hope actually is. It is not a thought, it is a movement. The English word hope is connected through old Germanic roots to a sense of leaping of the body, springing toward something. You can feel the truth of this physically. When you hope for someone coming through a door, you lean toward it. When you hope to be chosen, you rise slightly, almost imperceptibly onto the balls of your feet. Hope lives in the posture before it lives in language. The whole self angled forward toward what it wants. The word remembers what we sometimes forget, that hope began as something the body did. This is why hope is so hard to fully kill with argument. It does not live only in the reasoning mind where doubt can find it. It is rooted in something older, in the lean of a creature toward life. Notice it next time. The small forward tilt of your body when you want something to come. That tilt is older than your name for it. It would be easy to assume hope is something you are simply born with, or without a fixed quantity handed out at the start. The clinical evidence says otherwise. Hope can be learned. Return to those two ingredients. We began with pathways, the routes forward and agency, the belief you can travel them. Therapists working from hope theory have found that both can be deliberately rebuilt. A person who feels trapped is helped to map even one small route they had not seen. A person who feels powerless is helped to recall the times they did in fact act and change something. Step by step, the sense of pathways and the sense of agency are reconstructed, and hope measurably rises. People arrive feeling there is no way forward and leave able to name several. This may be the most quietly liberating fact of all. If hope can be taught, then a present absence of hope is not a verdict. It is a starting point. You are not stuck with the amount of hope you happen to feel today. Like any human capacity, it can be practiced, strengthened, and slowly grown back. Put a person in complete darkness, with no window, no clock, no sign of the turning day, and something quietly remarkable happens. The mind does not stop at the present. It keeps building forward. People who have spent long stretches in caves, in windowless cells, in the deep dark of polar winter, report the same thing. The mind refuses to stay still in the now. It goes on constructing tomorrow, picturing the meal they will eat, the face they will see, the moment they will step back into the light. Researchers studying prolonged sensory deprivation and isolation have found that this forward projection continues even with no external evidence that a tomorrow is coming. The brain manufactures the future from the inside, with nothing outside to confirm it. There is something almost defiant in this. The dark offers no proof that morning exists, and the mind insists on it anyway. It suggests that hope is not merely a response to good signs in the environment. When the signs vanish entirely, hope does not vanish with them. It turns inward and keeps making the future by hand. Sometimes everything a person has comes down to one image held so clearly it becomes a kind of food, a single face waiting on the other side of all of this. Among prisoners of war and long-held captives, a pattern appears again and again in their later accounts. What carried them was not a broad hope for rescue, but something far more specific. A man would fix on the moment he would walk back through his own front door, and his wife would turn around. He would rehearse it, the light in the room, the exact way she would look up. That one imagined reunion, returned to 1,000 times, became the thing he survived toward. Those who held such an image often endured conditions that broke others who had nothing so precise to reach for. This tells us something about how hope actually works in extremity. It does not stay abstract. It narrows, sharpens, attaches itself to one concrete and beloved thing. The mind, it seems, cannot live on the general. But give it one clear face to walk toward, and it will cross almost any distance to reach it. When you think you are doing nothing, your brain is quietly doing one of its most important things. It is rehearsing your tomorrows. There is a network in the brain that switches on precisely when you stop concentrating, when your attention drifts, and you stare out a window or wait for a kettle. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, and for a long time its busyness during rest was a puzzle. Why would the brain work so hard when we are doing nothing? The answer, in large part, is that this network spends much of its idle time imagining the future running scenarios, simulating what might come and how we might meet it. Daydreaming, it turns out, is the mind preparing. So the wandering of an unfocused mind is not waste. It is one of the ways a human being stays oriented toward what lies ahead. The next time you catch yourself drifting, picturing some future that may or may not arrive, understand what you are doing. You are not avoiding the present. You are quietly keeping hope's machinery warm. You would expect relief to come only after a hard situation improves. Sometimes the relief comes first, and nothing in the situation has changed at all. Cortisol is the body's main stress hormone, the chemistry that floods through us under threat and keeps us braced and wary. Researchers measuring it have found something worth pausing over. When a person shifts into a more hopeful frame, when they begin to believe a way through exists, cortisol levels can fall before any real circumstance has moved. The threat is still there. The bills, the diagnosis, the danger, all unchanged. But the body, taking its cue from the mind's new posture, eases its alarm. This is the body trusting the mind's forecast. It does not wait for proof in the outer world. The inner shift toward hope is itself read as a signal that the worst may pass, and the body begins to stand down. It means hope is not only a comfort to the spirit, it reaches into the bloodstream and changes the physical conditions a person is living under, lightening the literal weight the body carries. Two people want the same thing. For one, it feels possible, for the other, impossibly distant. Inside their brains, those two wants do not look the same at all. When a goal sits within reach, the brain engages its reward and motivation systems in a particular active way, lighting the circuitry that drives a person to move toward it. But when the same goal feels impossibly far, when the distance seems uncrossable, that machinery responds more faintly, and the brain begins in effect to disengage. This is part of why despair is so physical. It is not only sadness, it is the reward system going quiet because the target has drifted out of believable range. The practical wisdom hidden here is older than the science. Break the impossible distance into a nearer step, and the brain re-engages, the motivation returns. This is why the smallest reachable goal can matter so much to a person near the edge. It does not just give them a task. It switches the machinery of hope back on by bringing the future close enough to believe. In the first hours after disaster strikes, what keeps a trapped person alive is rarely what we would guess. It is not yet hunger or thirst that decides things. It is whether they believe help is on the way. Rescue workers and survival researchers describe this with striking consistency. A human body can endure for a remarkably long time without food, and a good while without water. In the early hours, the deciding factor is something else entirely. The belief that someone knows that effort is underway, that across the rubble or the snow, a search is moving toward them. Those who hold that belief conserve themselves, stay calm, ration their strength. Those convinced they have been forgotten can decline with frightening speed, the body following the mind's verdict that no one is coming. This is hope at its most starkly physical. The conviction that one is not abandoned does measurable work in keeping a person alive long enough to be found. It is also why a single called out reassurance, a voice saying, "We are here, we are coming," can change everything. It does not feed the body. It does something the body needs even more. Anthropologists have looked across the whole sweep of human cultures, the vast and the vanished, the isolated and the connected, searching for the things every people share. hope is on that short list. Languages differ in nearly everything. The words for color, for kinship, for time itself shift from one society to the next. Yet wherever researchers have looked across continents and across the long reach of recorded history, they find no documented human culture that lacks a concept for hope. Every people in their own tongue have a word for the act of leaning toward a better tomorrow. The forms vary, woven into different gods, different stories, different rituals of spring and harvest and birth. But the underlying capacity is everywhere. It appears to be not a cultural invention, but a human constant. When something shows up in every culture humans have ever built, it is telling us this thing is not optional. It is part of the equipment of being human. Wherever people have lived, in whatever conditions they have, needed a way to reach toward what is not yet here. And so everywhere they made one. You may have felt this without naming it. You sit down beside someone heavy with worry, including your own, and a few minutes later, something has shifted, lightened, opened. Hope, it turns out, moves between people with surprising ease. Studies of mood and emotional contagion show that even brief contact with a person who carries a hopeful outlook can measurably lift another person's own sense of what is possible. It does not require a speech or advice. Often, it is something quieter, the steadiness in their voice. The way they hold the situation as though it still has openings in it. The struggling person borrows almost without noticing a little of the other's posture toward the future. This is one of the gentlest powers a human being holds, and most of us underestimate it entirely. We assume we have nothing to offer someone in despair unless we can solve their problem. But you do not have to fix anything. Simply by remaining genuinely hopeful in their presence, you may hand a struggling person back a possibility they had lost sight of. The transfer is real, and it costs you nothing. There is a famous experiment involving a child, a marshmallow, and a small agony of waiting. What it revealed reaches much further into a life than anyone first expected. A young child is left alone with one treat and a promise: wait and you can have two. Some hold out, some give in. The simple test seemed almost trivial at the time, but when researchers followed these children across the years, a quiet pattern emerged. Those who could wait, who could hold a hopeful belief that more would come if they endured the present, tended to fare better decades on, across measures of well-being and capacity to cope. The waiting was never really about the treat. It was an early sign of the ability to trust the future enough to invest the present in it. This is hope wearing its most practical face. To delay gratification is underneath to believe that tomorrow will keep its promise. And that belief, formed early and strengthened over a life, turns out to shape a person's path far more than we would guess from such a small beginning. To wait well is already to hope well. We assume that when a cure becomes impossible, hope must simply end, that there is a door beyond which it cannot follow. Those who sit with the dying tell a different story. Among people facing the end of life, palliative care workers and researchers observe a striking thing. Hope does not vanish when the hope for cure is gone. It moves. It relocates itself to smaller, nearer ground. The hope to see one more spring. The hope to reach a grandchild's birthday. The hope for a good day, a clear afternoon, a particular person at the bedside. The horizon draws closer, but hope simply travels with it, attaching to whatever future remains, however brief. People who had hoped to be cured find themselves hoping just as fiercely for a single ordinary tomorrow. This tells us something profound about the nature of hope. It is not bound to any one object. Take its largest object away, and it does not die. It finds a smaller one. There is deep reassurance in this. Hope is not all or nothing. As long as there is any future at all, even an afternoon's worth, hope has somewhere to live. Most things divide when you share them. A loaf cut among many leaves, each person with less. Hope does not seem to obey this rule. Shared, it grows. When fear moves through a group, it can certainly spread, but it tends to fragment people, each pulling into their own dread. Hope behaves differently. Researchers studying groups under strain find that when hope is voiced and shared, it does not thin out across the people present. It amplifies. One person's hope strengthens another's, which feeds back and strengthens the first. until a shared and steadier hope holds the whole group up. The believing of others becomes evidence of a kind that the believing is warranted. This is why communities under pressure so often hold together, not through the strongest individual, but through something that lives between people, passed back and forth and growing as it goes. Think of a time you sat among others facing something hard and felt the collective steadiness become more than any one of you brought to it. That was hope doing the rare thing it does, multiplying exactly where you would expect it to run out. We tend to file our feelings into separate rooms as if grief lived here and hope lived there and never the two at once. The human heart does not keep them so neatly apart. Anyone who has loved and lost knows the strange doubleness of certain moments. Standing at a graveside, a person can feel the full weight of grief and in the very same breath, a quiet hope for the others still living for some meaning that might yet come for a morning beyond this one. Researchers studying bereavement have documented this directly. Grief and hope are not opposites that cancel each other out. They coexist, woven together, present in the same heart at the same time. One does not have to end for the other to begin. This is gentler and truer than the tidy story we are often told that we must finish grieving before we may hope again. You do not have to choose. You can carry the loss and still lean toward tomorrow both at once, the grief and the hope holding hands in the same chest. That is not confusion. That is simply what it is to be fully human and fully alive. Your memory is not a neutral recorder. It keeps some things and lets others fade, and it has a quiet preference about which ones to hold. Among the things the brain tends to keep vivid are the moments when hope was rewarded, when the thing you reached for actually came. Memory researchers have found that emotionally charged and meaningful outcomes are encoded more strongly than neutral ones, etched in with more detail and called back more easily later. Over a lifetime, this builds something quietly valuable. A private archive of times the future turned out all right, of effort that paid off, of darkness that lifted. These are kept closer to the surface than the long, flat stretches in between. This means that when you reach into memory for evidence that things can improve, the evidence is by design easier to find than it should be by chance. It is as if the mind has been collecting proof of hope's worth all along, storing the rescues and the recoveries where you can reach them, so that on the day you most need to believe a hard thing can turn your own past, is already holding examples up to the light. Here is something that seems backward until you look at it closely. Hope cannot exist where things are certain. It needs the unknown to function at all. Think about it. You do not hope for the sun to rise because you are sure it will. You do not hope to be breathing in a moment. Certainty leaves no room for hope, because hope is, by its nature, a reaching towards something not yet settled. It lives only in the open space between knowing it will happen and knowing it won't. The more uncertain the outcome, the more there is for hope to do. This is not a weakness in hope. It is the precise condition it was made for. We sometimes wish for certainty, imagining it would bring us peace. But certainty would leave nothing to hope for, and a life with nothing to hope for is a poorer thing than we suppose. So the not knowing that troubles you, the open question you wish were closed, is not hope's enemy. It is the very ground hope stands on. Without the unknown, hope would have nowhere to live. For most of human history, winter was not a season but a trial, a long, dark gauntlet that some would not survive. What carried whole communities through was something simple and shared. They knew spring was coming. Picture a village deep in the cold months, stores running low, the ground iron hard, the nights endless. There was no guarantee any particular person would last to the thaw. And yet the community held a steady collective expectation that the light would return, the ground would soften, the green would come back as it always had, long before modern heating or medicine could blunt winter's edge. This shared certainty that spring would arrive was itself a survival tool. People rationed, endured, and held on, sustained in part by the rhythm they trusted the world to keep. The festivals our ancestors placed at midwinter were not random. They fell at the darkest point precisely to mark the turning to say aloud, "The light comes back from here." That ancient expectation still lives in us. When you feel the particular relief of the first warm day after a long winter, you are feeling something humans have leaned on for as long as there have been winters to survive. We sometimes shake our heads at the young for their wild optimism, their certainty that everything will work out. But the leaning toward hope in adolescence is not foolishness. It is built into the brain itself. The teenage brain is in a particular and powerful state. Its reward systems are highly active, its sensitivity to possibility heightened, while the regions that temper risk and dampen expectation are still maturing. Neuroscientists studying adolescent development find that this produces a mind tilted strongly toward imagined futures, drawn vividly toward what could be, often well ahead of what is. The young hope hard, and they hope without yet having lived through the disappointments that teach caution. It would be easy to call this naive, but look at what it makes possible. It is this very tilt toward the unlived future that lets the young leave home, attempt the impossible, build lives no cautious calculation would have approved. A society needs this. The undimmed hope of the young is not a flaw to be corrected, but a renewable force, generation after generation, arriving with their belief in tomorrow not yet worn down, ready to reach for what their elders had stopped imagining. There is a tempting caricature of the hopeful person as someone who simply does not see the danger, who floats through life on a cloud of pleasant blindness. The research takes that picture apart. When psychologists compare hopeful people with their more pessimistic counterparts, a surprising finding emerges. Hopeful people are not in general less aware of risk. They often perceive the dangers and obstacles just as clearly, sometimes more clearly. What distinguishes them is not what they see, but what they do with what they see. They register the threat fully, and then they act toward their goal anyway, because their sense of agency and pathways remains intact, alongside their clear sight of the danger. This matters enormously, because it means hope is not a failure to face reality. It is a particular way of facing reality eyes open that refuses to let the danger have the final word. The hopeful person and the frightened person may be looking at exactly the same hard truth. The difference is that one has been stopped by it, and the other, seeing it just as plainly, has decided to move. When hope has run out, we often try to argue our way back to it, reasoning, reframing, telling ourselves the careful case for why things might improve. There is something that works faster than all of it. It is being helped. Not advised, not talked to, but actually helped by a person who shows up and does something. Researchers studying despair and recovery notice that the lift from a single concrete act of assistance can outpace anything self-talk achieves. The reason seems to be that despair is, at its core, the felt conviction of being alone with an impossible situation. And no internal argument fully dislodges that conviction. But one person arriving, putting their hands to the problem alongside you, refutes it directly. The aloneness is simply no longer true. This is worth remembering on both sides of the exchange. When you cannot reason yourself back into hope, you may not need better reasoning. You may need company in the work. And when someone you love is past the reach of words, you do not have to find the right thing to say. You can simply come and help, and let your presence make the argument that your words could not. There is a finding in medicine that sounds almost like folklore, except that it has been measured carefully again and again. The same wound closes faster in a hopeful body than in a despairing one. Researchers studying wound healing have tracked actual physical recovery, the closing of incisions, the knitting of tissue against a person's psychological state. The pattern is consistent enough to take seriously. Those who hold the belief that they will recover, who carry a hopeful and unstressed outlook, tend to heal measurably faster than those weighed down by chronic stress and hopelessness. The mechanism appears to run through the body's stress chemistry and immune function, which hope quiets and despair keeps inflamed. The mind's posture toward the future reaches all the way down into the rate at which flesh repairs itself. This is not the mind imagining itself well. It is the mind altering the physical conditions under which the body does its own ancient work of mending. We are not made of two separate things, a body that heals and a mind that merely watches. They are one system. And hope, it turns out, is something the body itself can use to get better. You have likely lived this without ever naming the pattern. A problem that felt unbearable at midnight looks somehow survivable by morning. Nothing about it has changed except that you slept. There is a reason behind the old advice to sleep on it. Across a night of rest, the brain does a great deal of quiet work, consolidating memory, regulating emotion, easing the chemistry of stress that had built through the day. Sleep researchers find that the emotional charge of a hard situation is often measurably reduced after sleep, the despair of the late hours softened by morning. The mind, it seems, rebuilds its hope overnight, almost as a matter of routine maintenance, restoring a clearer and steadier view of the future that exhaustion had darkened. This is why the depths of the night are such an unreliable judge of a life. At 3 a.m, hope is at its thinnest, and everything looks worse than it is. So if you ever find yourself certain in the dark that there is no way forward, hold off on believing it. Wait for the light. There is a real chance that morning will hand back the hope the night took away. We imagine hope and despair as distant countries far apart, with a long journey between them. In the brain, they are practically neighbors, sharing much of the same ground. The neural systems that handle hope, the circuits weighing the future, anticipating reward, estimating whether a goal can be reached, are largely the same systems that, tuned differently, produce despair. Hope and despair are not processed in separate, distant regions, but in overlapping ones, the same machinery running in 2 directions. This is part of why the shift between them can happen so fast, why a person can drop from hope into despair in an instant, or just as suddenly rise the other way. There is something quietly hopeful buried in this very fact. The nearness that lets hope collapse into despair also lets despair turn back into hope, and along a short road, not a long one. If you are in the dark place now, it may not feel like it, but you are not far from the other. The same circuitry that is generating this despair is the circuitry through which hope returns. The distance between where you are and where you want to be is shorter than the despair would have you believe. Those who keep vigil at the bedsides of the dying, the nurses and hospice workers who have done it many times, report something that surprises almost everyone who has not. The end is more often than we expect, not about fear. You would assume the dying speak mostly of dread, of what they are losing, of the dark ahead. And some do. But those who attend many deaths describe how frequently the dying turn instead toward something they are still looking forward to. A reunion they believe is coming. A person they expect to see again. A peace they sense approaching. Even at the very threshold, the mind reaches forward, finding some future, however it conceives it, to lean toward. Hope, it appears, is among the last things to leave a human being persisting, even where there seems to be no earthly tomorrow left to hope for. This is not a claim about what waits beyond. It is an observation about the human mind and what it does when it has nowhere left to go but forward. Even at the end, we lean. Whatever we believe lies ahead, the leaning itself seems to be built into us so deeply that it accompanies us all the way to the door. When everything feels like it is coming apart, there is a small action that can quietly restore your footing, and it is more powerful than its modesty suggests. You make a plan. It need not be a grand strategy. Psychologists who study coping find that the simple act of forming even a small concrete plan measurably restores a person's sense of control and lifts their hope. The reason connects back to those 2 ingredients we keep returning to. A plan is quite literally a pathway, a route from here to somewhere better, and the act of making one reactivates the sense of agency that overwhelm had switched off. The situation may be just as hard, but the person is no longer only being acted upon. They have become, again, someone who acts. This is why a person drowning in a crisis can be steadied so much by being asked a simple question. What is one thing you could do next? You do not need the whole way mapped to feel hope return. You need only the next step named and chosen. The smallest plan reaches into the chaos and hands a person back the one thing despair had taken, the sense that they can still move. There is a sobering chapter in the history of childcare that teaches in the hardest possible way where human hope begins. It begins in being answered. In certain institutions of the past, infants were kept clean and fed, but received almost no responsive warmth. No one who came reliably when they cried. no consistent face that answered their reaching. Observers documented something heartbreaking. These babies, materially provided for, could decline anyway, growing listless, failing to thrive, some losing the very will to keep going. What they lacked was not nourishment, but response, the felt experience that their needs called something back from the world. Without that, the foundation of hope itself could not form. This is the dark mirror of where we began the infant learning hope through the caregiver who returns. Here is what happens when no one does. It tells us with painful clarity that hope is not something we generate alone, sealed inside ourselves. From the very first days, it is built between us in the reliable answering of one person to another. We learn to expect a tomorrow because in the beginning someone reliably came. Watch what happens in a room full of people under pressure when one person stays calm and steady. The shift can move through the whole space faster than any words could carry it. In groups facing strain, a crew in trouble, a team against a deadline, a family around bad news, emotion does not stay private. It moves between people. And researchers studying group dynamics find that a single, steady, hopeful presence can recalibrate the emotional tone of an entire room. The others, reading that one person's composure, reading the way they hold the situation as still workable, begin unconsciously to match it. One voice that refuses panic can pull a dozen others back from its edge. The hope of one becomes the floor the rest can stand on. This places a quiet responsibility and a quiet gift in the hands of anyone who can hold steady when things go wrong. You may never know in such a moment how much your own calm is doing for the people around you, but the steadiness you hold is not staying inside you. It is spreading, settling nerves you cannot see, giving others a hope they are quietly borrowing from your face. Here is one of the kindest findings in all of psychology, and almost no one believes it until they have lived it. We are reliably wrong about how badly the future will hurt. When researchers ask people to predict how they will feel after some painful event, a breakup, a failure, a serious loss, and then check back later on how they actually felt, a consistent gap appears. People overestimate, often by a great deal, how bad and how long the suffering will be. They underestimate their own resilience. The quiet machinery of recovery that begins working almost immediately. The dreaded future, when it arrives, is nearly always more survivable than the dread predicted. We are built to bounce back faster than we can imagine in advance. There is deep comfort in this, especially when you are bracing for something you fear you cannot bear. The part of you forecasting catastrophe is not a reliable witness. It does not know about the recovery already waiting in you, the adaptation that will begin the moment the thing actually happens. You are almost certainly more able to survive what you fear than the fear is telling you. You have survived this kind of misprediction before. Some images seem to belong to no single culture, surfacing instead everywhere humans speak as if drawn from something we all share. The light at the end of the tunnel is one of these. In language after language, across peoples who never met or traded a single word, some version of this image recurs. The dark passage with light at its far end. The night that holds a coming dawn. The narrow place that opens out. The specific words differ, but the underlying picture of darkness that is passing, rather than permanent, of an opening ahead, appears with remarkable consistency across the world's languages. It seems to arise independently again and again, because it captures something every human being eventually needs to express. When an image is invented separately by nearly everyone, it is telling us that the experience behind it is universal. We all, at some point, find ourselves in the dark passage, and we all reach for the same picture of getting through. This is not borrowed metaphor. It is the human mind everywhere, independently discovering the same truth and reaching for the same image to hold it. The tunnel is dark, yes, but every people on earth has insisted in their own words that it ends. There is a strange and beautiful escape hatch built into hope. When you cannot find any for yourself, you can still hold it fully and powerfully for someone else. A person who has genuinely given up on their own future can still be sustained by fierce hope on behalf of another, a child, a partner, someone they love who has a road ahead. Those who work with people in despair see this often. Direct hope for oneself may be gone, but hope for another remains intact, and that borrowed direction hope is enough to keep the person moving, eating, surviving. They go on, not for themselves, but so that they can be there for the one they still believe in. This tells us hope does not strictly require that we believe in our own tomorrow. It only requires that we believe in some tomorrow worth being present for. If you ever reach a point where you cannot hope for yourself, this may be the bridge across. Is there someone whose future you still believe in? Then you have not lost your hope. You have only relocated it into another person, and it can carry you just the same. When people who have come through the worst try to explain how they did it, a particular kind of detail keeps appearing in their accounts. It is almost always one image held with absolute stubbornness. Survivors of disasters, of long captivities, of conditions that should not be survivable frequently describe fixing on a single specific picture of a future moment and refusing through everything to release it. One person held the image of swimming in a particular lake again, another of holding her newborn not yet born when the ordeal began. The image was concrete, sensory, exact, and they returned to it relentlessly, making it the fixed point around which everything else could collapse without taking them down. They did not survive on a vague hope. They survived on one clear scene they had decided to live to reach. There is real instruction in this for the rest of us. Hope in extremity does not work as a general optimism. It works as a single, vivid, chosen destination. If you are reaching toward something hard, it may help to make it that specific. Not a better life in the abstract, but one exact moment you mean to arrive at. Picture it clearly enough, and it becomes something to walk toward one step at a time all the way through. This one quietly rearranges how you understand pleasure itself. The richest moment of a good thing is often not the having of it. It is the approach. Neuroscientists studying the brain's reward system have found something that seems at first almost unfair. Dopamine, the chemistry of motivation and reward, frequently surges more strongly in the anticipation of a pleasure than at the moment the pleasure actually arrives. The waiting, the nearing, the almost lights the brain more brightly than the arrival. This is why the days before a long-awaited event can feel so charged, and why the event itself sometimes lands a little quieter than expected. The looking forward was chemically much of the reward. Far from being a disappointment, this is one of the most generous features of how we are made. It means hope is not just a route to good things. Hope is itself a good thing, felt directly in the body now. So the pleasure you take in looking forward is not a lesser preliminary thing, a mere down payment on the real reward to come. In a real sense, it is the reward already being paid out in the very act of hoping. The anticipation is not the waiting room. It is part of the gift. Hope is not usually rebuilt in one grand restoration. It comes back the way trust does, in small pieces, each one earning the next. Think of someone whose hope has been worn down to almost nothing, who has stopped expecting good things because expecting had only led to disappointment. How does such a person begin again? Not by suddenly believing in a bright future. Researchers studying how hope is rebuilt find that it returns incrementally. A small thing is hoped for and actually arrives. Then another. Each fulfilled expectation, however modest, slightly strengthens the willingness to expect again. The brain, registering that hoping led somewhere, becomes a little more willing to hope. Slowly, on a foundation of small kept promises, the capacity rebuilds. This is why patience matters so much with a person or a self whose hope has been broken. You cannot argue them back to it in a single leap, but you can offer one small thing that comes true, and then another. Each one is a brick. Hope rebuilt this way slowly from many small fulfilled expectations tends to stand more solidly than hope that arrives all at once, because it was constructed from evidence piece by patient piece. Among people who have lost nearly everything, who arrive at a refuge or a shelter with almost nothing left, relief workers notice a small and recurring detail. There is so often one object carefully kept. It is rarely the most valuable thing they could have saved. It is a photograph, a key to a house that may no longer stand, a child's drawing, a seed packet, a letter. Something that points forward, that says there was a life, and there will be a life again. Those who work with refugees and disaster survivors describe how people will protect such an object through everything. when nearly all else has been let go. The object is not really kept for itself. It is kept because it holds in physical form a thread to a future the person refuses to release. This is hope made into something you can hold in your hand. When the future feels too abstract to grasp, a person anchors it to an object and carries it. You may have one yourself, something you would never explain to anyone but would not part with because it quietly stands for a tomorrow you are still walking toward. We keep these things not because of what they are, but because of what they promise. If you had to bet on which student will succeed, you would probably look at how clever they are. The research suggests you might do better to look at something else entirely. When psychologists study what actually predicts how students perform over time, hope turns out to be a remarkably strong indicator in some studies, a better predictor of academic success than measured intelligence or prior test scores. The reason connects to what hope actually is. A hopeful student believes there are pathways to their goal and that they can travel them, so they persist through difficulty, try new routes when one fails, and keep showing up. Raw ability without that persistence and belief in a way forward achieves far less than we assume. This should change how we think about talent itself. The capacity to keep reaching to believe a way exists and keep working toward it often outperforms the gifts we are taught to prize. It is also quietly democratizing. Intelligence can feel like a fixed inheritance handed out unevenly at birth, but hope can be learned and grown, which means the trait that most reliably opens the future is one almost anyone can build. You can watch hope happen in the body in something as basic as the rhythm of the heart. It steadies the moment the mind turns a corner. When a person dwells on a threat, replaying the danger, the body holds itself in alarm, the heart quickened, the system braced. But researchers measuring these responses find that when the same person shifts, when they stop circling the threat and begin picturing a way through it, the heart rate measurably steadies. The physiological storm settles. The threat in the outer world has not changed. What changed is the direction of attention from the wall to the opening, and the body responds at once to the new orientation, calming itself in real time. This is worth knowing because it is something you can use. The body is listening closely to what the mind chooses to picture. When you feel yourself locked onto a threat, heart racing, caught in the loop of what could go wrong, you can deliberately turn the picture, not denying the danger but asking, what is the way through? The heart will often begin to answer before the mind is even convinced, steadying itself as soon as you point it toward a path. There is one human gesture that says hope more plainly than any word, and people have been making it for as long as there has been soil to make it in. You place a seed in the ground. Consider what the act actually requires. You take something small and dry, bury it in the dark, and walk away trusting in a future you cannot see, and a harvest that is months and many uncertainties away. Across cultures, and across the whole span of agricultural history, the planting of a seed has carried exactly this meaning. The body's quiet declaration of belief in a tomorrow it cannot guarantee. It is hope translated out of the mind and into the hands, an act that only makes sense if you trust the future to arrive. This is why the image of the seed appears in the sacred stories of so many peoples. It is hope you can perform with your body, a faith enacted in dirt. You may have felt a version of this yourself, pressing a seed into a pot or simply watching something you tended begin to grow. That small lift you feel is ancient. It is the particular hope of someone who has bet on the future and watched the future quietly keep its side of the bargain. Something passes between a doctor and a patient that has nothing to do with the prescription, and it can change how the patient actually fares. We can measure that it happens. We are still learning exactly how. When a physician conveys genuine, confident hope when the patient leaves, believing that this person expects them to get better outcomes, can shift in measurable ways beyond what the treatment alone would predict. Part of this runs through the placebo pathways we touched on earlier, the body responding to expectation. Part runs through the patient's own behavior, their willingness to follow the plan sustained by a borrowed belief. And part of it, researchers honestly admit, runs through pathways they are still working to map. The transfer of hope from healer to patient is real and not yet fully explained. What we can say is that the encounter itself is part of the medicine. The doctor's belief is not merely bedside manner laid over the real treatment. It is in some measurable degree treatment. There is something quietly moving in that. Across the small distance of a consulting room, one human being's confident hope for another can reach into that other's body and help tilt the outcome toward life. We are still mapping how, but we know that it does. Under enough pressure, the mind does something that looks like a flaw but works like a rescue. It stops trying to hold everything and clamps down on one thing. When a person is pushed to the edge of what they can bear, attention narrows dramatically. The wide, scattered awareness of ordinary life collapses inward. Researchers studying how people function in extreme stress find that this narrowing, often onto a single sustaining thought, a single reason, a single image of getting through, is not a malfunction. It is a survival mechanism. By shedding everything else, the mind concentrates all its remaining force on the one thread worth holding. The narrowing that would handicap you on an ordinary day becomes in extremity exactly what saves you, because it lets you pour everything into the single thing that matters. This is why survivors so often report that at the worst moment, their whole world shrank to one thought. That shrinking was not their mind failing, it was their mind protecting them. There is a strange reassurance in knowing this. If you are ever in such a place and you find your entire being narrowing onto one stubborn point of hope, do not distrust it. That narrowing is an ancient piece of equipment, doing precisely what it was built to do. Almost everything that sustains us runs down with use. Strength tires, attention depletes, even patience wears thin. Hope appears to break this rule in a quiet and remarkable way. Spending hope does not seem to use it up. A person can draw on hope through a long ordeal day after day and find it still there, sometimes stronger at the end. Unlike a stored resource that diminishes as you consume it, hope behaves more like a capacity that is maintained by being used, even strengthened. Each time it carries a person through, it tends to deepen rather than deplete. This is part of why people who have survived the most hold so much of it, not despite all they have spent, but because of it. This sets hope apart from nearly everything else we rely on to get through hard times. The others you must ration. This one you can pour out freely. You do not have to be careful with your hope, hoarding it against some future when you might need it more. It is not a finite store that draining now will leave you short of later. Use it. It refills. It is one of the few things you can spend without fear of running out. There is a small practice, almost too simple to take seriously, that quietly changes the quality of a person's sleep and the texture of their mornings. You write down what you are looking forward to. In studies of sleep and well-being, researchers find that the simple act of noting things one anticipates with pleasure, even small ones, the coffee, the call, the walk planned for tomorrow, is associated with deeper sleep and waking with less dread. The mind, given something to lean toward, as it drifts off, settles more easily. And the dawn arrives carrying a little less of that low morning heaviness so many people know. It costs nothing and takes a moment, and yet it measurably shifts how the body moves through the night and into the day. The reason seems to be that the mind handles the dark hours better when it has somewhere forward to rest its attention. Dread fills a vacuum. Anticipation fills the same space differently. You might try it tonight. Before sleep, name one thing, however small, that you are quietly looking forward to. You are not solving anything. You are simply giving your sleeping mind a direction to face, and there is good reason to think it will thank you in the morning. When you study what actually happens after a community is struck by catastrophe, the rebuilding rarely follows the cold logic you might expect. It runs on something else, something shared and stubborn. By any rational calculation, many communities should not rebuild at all. The cost is enormous, the risk of it happening again is real. The sensible move would often be to leave and not return. And yet again and again, people come back to the flooded town, the burned village, the shaken city, and begin again. Researchers who study disaster recovery find that this rebuilding is driven less by cost-benefit reasoning than by a shared, almost defiant refusal to let the place and its future die. The hope is collective, held between neighbors, and it overrides the logic that says give up. This is hope operating at the scale of a whole people, and it is one of the most powerful forces in human history. It is why cities rise again, on the same ground that destroyed them. There is something to honor in this stubbornness. It is not naive. The people know the risk. They return anyway together, because some refusals to abandon hope are exactly what make a future possible, where logic alone would have left only ruins. Here is one of the quieter ways hope defies the limits we expect of it. It does not die with the person who first lit it. It can be handed on and carried far beyond them. A parent's hope for a child outlives the parent carried forward in the grown child's choices, long after the parent is gone. A teacher's belief in a student becomes something that student spends a lifetime living up to and passing to others. A leader's vision of a better future can move through generations who never met them. Historians and those who study how hope travels through families and movements find that it behaves like something held in trust, received from one person, kept and passed forward to the next. The original holder may be long gone. The hope they kindled goes on. This means that the hope you carry was in part given to you. Someone hoped for you, believed in a future for you, and that belief is still at work inside you, perhaps without your knowing its source. And it means your own hope need not end with you. The belief you hold for someone, for a child, a student, a cause, can outlast your life, traveling forward through people you will never meet. A quiet inheritance passed hand to hand down a line you cannot see the end of. Something curious happens in the brain when we look forward to seeing someone we love again. The distance, it turns out, barely registers. When researchers study the brain's response to anticipated reunion, they find the same reward and attachment regions activating whether the meeting is hours away or years away. The brain that lights up, imagining a loved one walking through the door tonight, looks much like the brain imagining that same reunion across a separation of years. The chemistry of longing does not scale neatly with time. The image of the face, the moment of meeting again, moves the same deep circuitry regardless of how far off it sits on the calendar. This helps explain how people endure separations that should be unbearable: the deployed soldier, the imprisoned parent, the migrant working an ocean away from family. The anticipated reunion can sustain them across years because to the brain holding the image, the reunion is in some sense always near. Think of someone you are waiting to see, someone far from you now. The warmth you feel imagining that meeting is not a faint, discounted version of the real thing because it lies in the future. To the part of you that loves them, the reunion is already happening a little every time you picture it. Pain seems like the most purely physical thing there is, a raw signal from the body that belief should have no power over. The research tells a more complicated and more hopeful story. Even among people living with chronic pain, the expectation that relief is coming measurably changes how much pain they actually feel. When a person believes help is on the way, that the next treatment will ease things, that the pain is not permanent, the experienced intensity of the pain itself can drop. This is not imagination or denial. Pain is constructed by the brain from many inputs, and expectation is one of them. The brain factors in what it believes about the future, and a hopeful expectation literally turns down the volume on the signal. This is one of the clearest demonstrations of how reaching into the future changes the felt present. Even the body's most insistent alarm can be quieted by hope. It also means that for someone in pain, the belief that it will end is not merely a comfort to offer alongside the real treatment. The belief is itself doing physical work, lessening the suffering in the moment, which is no small thing to be able to give. We tend to picture hope as something that starts bright and slowly dims as a hard time drags on. The actual shape is often the reverse. Hope frequently burns highest near the end. People who have come through long ordeals describe a particular surge that arrives not at the start, but at the turning, the moment they sense the worst is behind them and the end is finally in view. There is something about the home stretch, the last stretch of a long recovery, the final miles of an arduous journey that concentrates hope rather than exhausting it. The nearness of the goal, the growing evidence that survival is actually possible, feeds back and intensifies the very hope that carried them this far. The end coming into sight makes the reaching stronger. This is worth holding on to in the middle of something hard, when hope may feel thin and you wonder how you will sustain it to the finish. You may not need to sustain this exact depleted hope all the way through. There is a real chance that as the end comes into view, your hope will not be running on fumes but rising, gathering force from the very sight of the finish, carrying you across the last stretch on more strength than you have now. There is a misunderstanding about hope that needs to be set down plainly because it keeps people from claiming it. Hope is not the refusal to see how bad things are. The truest hope is not a turning away from hard reality, not a pleasant fiction laid over a grim truth. It is something far sturdier. It holds the full weight of how bad things actually are, looks at it without flinching, and reaches forward anyway. The person practicing this kind of hope is not the one who says it isn't so bad. It is the one who says, this is as bad as it looks, and I am still going to reach for what might come next. Researchers and clinicians distinguish this clearly from denial. Denial shrinks the problem. Hope keeps the problem at full size and adds something to it, a reaching. This is why hope and honesty are not enemies. The deepest hope is the most honest because it has nothing to protect itself from. It has already let the full truth in. So you do not have to pretend things are better than they are in order to hope. You are allowed to see it all, the full hard weight of it, and reach forward at the same time. That is not contradiction. That is hope in its strongest form. When people who have leaned on hope through real hardship try to describe what it actually felt like, they reach for a surprising vocabulary. Almost no one says it was loud. We might expect hope to be described as a blaze, a surge, a bright burst of certainty. But that is not how most people who have relied on it speak. They describe something quiet, a steady undercurrent, a low, persistent sense that there was somewhere to go running beneath everything else, often barely noticeable until they looked for it. Those who study how people experience hope find this consistently. Its felt quality is rarely dramatic. It is more like a quiet floor underneath the noise of fear, holding steady while everything above it shook. This matters because people sometimes think they have lost hope, when what they have actually lost is the loud, dramatic feeling of it. The quiet kind may still be there, underneath, unnoticed. If you have been searching yourself for some bright surge of hope and finding nothing, look lower. Beneath the fear, is there still some quiet sense that you will keep going, that there is still a next thing? That faint, steady undercurrent, easy to overlook, is not the weak version of hope. For most people who survive on it, it is the real one. There is a particular window each day when the mind turns most readily toward the future, and you pass through it every night, in the quiet space just before sleep. In the drowsy minutes between waking and sleep, as the grip of the day loosens, the mind tends to drift forward, rehearsing possible tomorrows, picturing what might come. Researchers studying this hypnagogic state, the threshold of sleep, find it is an especially active time for the imagining of futures, the brain loosening into a more associative, forward-leaning mode. It is why so many people find themselves just before sleep, either spiraling into worry about what lies ahead or drifting pleasantly towards something they look forward to. The same window serves both. This is quietly useful to know because it means the doorway to sleep is also a doorway you can choose to point in a particular direction. What you let your mind rehearse in those last waking minutes shapes more than that night's sleep. You are in a small way choosing which version of the future to practice. Turn it gently towards something you hope for rather than something you fear, and you give that hopeful future a little more room to take root in the most receptive minutes your mind has all day. There is a hard question that sits beneath all of this. What about the people whose hope has not merely faded but been deliberately destroyed? Even there, the answer is not what despair would predict. People who have endured deliberate attempts to break their hope through captivity, through abuse, through systems built to crush the will, are not beyond its return. Those who work in recovery and rehabilitation find that hope can be rebuilt, even in people whose capacity for it was methodically dismantled. It takes time, and it takes safety. And it takes the slow relearning that the world can be trusted to answer. But the capacity itself is not destroyed beyond repair. It can be relit carefully from the smallest spark in people who had every reason to have lost it forever. This is perhaps the strongest evidence we have for how deeply hope is rooted in us. You can take everything from a person, and the ground from which hope grows can still remain. If hope can be rebuilt, even after it has been deliberately broken, then no ordinary loss of hope is final. Whatever has worn yours down lighter circumstances than deliberate destruction, the capacity beneath it is almost certainly still intact, waiting only for the conditions to begin growing back. We have circled this truth a few times now, and it is worth meeting head-on because it tells us how hope actually survives in a real human being. It rarely lives in the grand and the general. It lives in the small and the specific. Ask people what carried them through something hard, and they almost never say a broad belief in better days. They say a date circled on a calendar, a particular face they would see again, a single promised thing, a meal, a homecoming, a season. Researchers studying how people endure find that hope reliably attaches itself to concrete specific details, rather than abstractions. The mind cannot quite hold on to better someday, but it can hold fiercely onto the 14th of next month, or one beloved face, and that small concrete anchor is enough to keep the whole weight of hope from drifting away. This is a quietly practical wisdom for anyone trying to hope through something hard. Do not reach for the vast and vague. Reach for the small and exact. Give your hope something specific to hold. One date, one face, one ordinary promised thing you mean to reach. The smallness is not a weakness. It is exactly what lets hope keep its grip when everything larger has become too heavy to carry. Look closely at much of what human beings build the things meant to outlast us, and you find a particular hope quietly at work in nearly all of it, the hope to be remembered after we are gone. So much of what people create reaches past the span of a single life. The planted tree we will not sit beneath. The book written for readers not yet born. The building, the business, the work meant to stand after the maker is gone. Historians and anthropologists trace how much of human creation is shaped by this forward-reaching hope, the wish that something of us will remain, that we will be held in memory by those who come after. From the earliest monuments to the small legacies of ordinary lives, this hope has been one of the quiet engines of human building. What moves me about this is that it is hope for a future the hoper will never personally experience, and yet it is powerful enough to organize a life around. You may feel it yourself in the urge to make something, raise someone, leave some mark that lasts. That urge is hope in one of its purest forms, a reaching toward a tomorrow you will not see sustained entirely by the belief that the tomorrow will come and that something of you will still be in it. Watch a child after a disappointment, a real one, tears and all, and then watch how quickly the world becomes interesting again. That speed of return is not shallowness. It is something we slowly lose and might learn from. Children recover their hope faster than adults do. After a setback that might keep an adult low for days, a child is often reaching toward the next possibility within the hour, the disappointment real but not lasting. Developmental researchers note that the young have a sense of possibility that is harder to extinguish, less weighed down by the accumulated evidence of past disappointments that makes adult hope more cautious. The child has not yet learned to expect the worst, and so the future stays open to them in a way it grows harder to keep open as we age. We sometimes call this innocence, as if it were merely a lack of knowledge. But it may be worth asking whether the child has something right that we have unlearned. Think back to how readily you once rebounded, how quickly the world filled again with things worth reaching for. That capacity did not vanish. It was only buried under years of caution. And some of what the young can teach us, if we let them, is how to dig a little of it back up. When you look at how people have survived the most extreme isolations ever recorded, solo voyages, polar winters, long solitary confinements, a single technique appears again and again. They built a future to live toward by hand, out of nothing but time. People enduring these vast stretches of solitude consistently describe the same survival strategy. They scheduled things to look forward to, a particular meal saved for a particular day, a task parceled out to mark the passing weeks, a small ritual reserved as a reward for reaching a milestone. By deliberately placing anticipated moments throughout the empty time ahead, they kept the future populated with things to reach for, and that steady supply of small anticipations carried them through what would otherwise have been an undifferentiated, hopeless expanse. This is hope, engineered consciously, hope as a discipline rather than a feeling, and it tells us something useful. When the future feels empty, you can deliberately furnish it. You do not have to wait for things to look forward to arrive on their own. You can place them there yourself, scheduling small, anticipated moments across the days ahead, building yourself a future worth reaching toward. The people who survived the loneliest stretches a human has ever endured did exactly this. It is a skill, and you can use it. Two people walk into the same difficult situation and quite literally see different things. Hope does not just change how we feel about what we see, it changes what we see in the first place. Attention is selective. Out of the overwhelming flood of everything around us, the brain chooses a small amount to notice, and hope quietly shapes that choosing. Researchers studying perception and mindset find that a hopeful person's attention is drawn more readily toward openings, possibilities, and routes forward, while a person sunk in hopelessness more readily notices the walls, the obstacles, the closures. Looking at the identical scene, the two genuinely perceive different features of it because hope has tuned the eyes toward what might work, and despair has tuned them toward what cannot. This is why hope can be self-fulfilling in a way that is not mystical at all. The person who notices the openings is the person positioned to walk through them. It also means that cultivating hope is not only about feeling better, it is about seeing more, catching the doors that despair would have walked you straight past. When you steady yourself toward hope, you are not fooling yourself about reality. You are widening the part of reality your eyes are willing to take in. There is a close family resemblance between two of the most life-giving things a person can feel, and it runs all the way down to their chemistry. Hope and curiosity are nearly cousins. The dopamine systems that generate hope, the pull toward an anticipated good, also generate curiosity, the pull toward what is not yet known. Both are forms of reaching toward something that lies ahead and remains uncertain. Neuroscientists studying motivation find these states drawing on overlapping circuitry. The same chemistry of wanting and seeking that turns us toward a hoped-for future also turns us toward an unanswered question. To be curious is in a sense to hope, to lean towards something out there worth discovering. This kinship is quietly useful because it means that when hope is hard to summon directly, curiosity can be a way back into it. Have you noticed how even in a low time, a genuine question can briefly lift you, a thing you suddenly want to know, a mystery that pulls you forward despite yourself? That pull is hope's close relative running on the same chemistry. And on the days when you cannot find hope head-on, simply staying curious, letting yourself want to know what happens next, keeps the same vital machinery turning. You would expect a long ordeal to drain hope steadily, leaving a person nearly empty by the time they reach the end. Many who have lived through such things report the opposite, and it is worth understanding why. People emerging from extended trials, long illnesses, drawn-out hardships, journeys that tested everything, frequently describe their hope as stronger near the end than it was in the middle. Part of this is the nearness of the finish, which we touched on before, but part of it is something deeper. Having survived this far, they now hold proof drawn from their own experience that they can endure, that the worst did not finish them. Each day survived becomes evidence, feeding the hope that carries them forward. The ordeal, rather than depleting their hope, has been quietly manufacturing it by demonstrating their own capacity to last. This reframes what a hard stretch is actually doing to a person. It is not only taking, it is also beneath the surface, building something. If you are partway through something long and difficult, consider that you may be stronger in hope at the end than you are now, not despite the ordeal but because of it. Every day you last is laying down evidence that you can, and that accumulating proof becomes a hope sturdier than any you could have started with. We have seen that a person can hope for someone else when they cannot hope for themselves. Beneath that lies a deeper truth about how closely hope and love are wound together. Hope and love draw on overlapping reserves in us, share much of the same emotional and neural ground. The attachment systems that bind us to the people we love are deeply entangled with the systems that let us hope, which is why the most powerful hope a person ever feels is so often hope for someone they love rather than for themselves. Love generates hope almost automatically, the beloved's future becoming something we cannot help but reach toward. Researchers studying both find them constantly intertwined, two expressions of a single deep capacity to be bound to what lies beyond ourselves. This explains something many people have felt without understanding: why hope for a child, a partner, a friend can be so much fiercer and more durable than hope for oneself. It is because that hope is made of love, and love is the strongest fuel hope has. So if you want to strengthen your hope, one of the surest ways is through your loves. The people and things you care for most are not separate from your hope. They are its deepest source. Here is something tender that those who care for people with failing memory observe again and again. Even as the past dissolves, the reaching toward a future can remain. In people living with advanced memory loss, much can fall away: names, faces, the thread of one's own story. And yet caregivers consistently notice that something forward-leaning often persists. The person still brightens at an expected visit, still reaches toward a meal they are anticipating, still responds to the sense that something good is coming. Even when they could not tell you what happened an hour ago, the capacity to hope, to lean toward an expected good in the present moment, seems to run on something separate from the memory that is fading, and it frequently outlasts it. There is real comfort in this for anyone walking alongside a person whose memory is leaving them. The hope, the capacity for anticipation and small joy is often still reachable when so much else is not. It tells us that hope is not built only out of remembered evidence about the past. It is something more fundamental, woven so deep into us that it can persist even as memory itself unravels the leaning toward tomorrow, outlasting the holding of yesterday. We have seen hope quiet stress and speed the healing of wounds. There is a further layer to this, reaching into the body's defenses themselves. Hope appears to strengthen the immune system over time. Researchers in the field that studies the links between mind and immunity have found associations between a sustained hopeful outlook and stronger immune function. People who maintain hope over the long run tend to show measures of immune response that hold up better than those of people sunk in chronic hopelessness and stress. The pathway appears to run again, through the stress chemistry that despair keeps elevated and hope helps quiet, since prolonged stress is known to suppress immune function. A hopeful outlook, by easing that chronic stress load, seems to leave the body's defenses freer to do their work. We should be honest that this is an area where much remains to be mapped, and the effects are subtle rather than miraculous. But the direction is consistent and worth taking seriously. It adds to a picture that has been building across all of these facts. Hope is not only a state of mind sitting apart from the body. It reaches down again and again into the actual physical workings of a person, all the way to the cells that defend us, quietly tilting the body toward life. We have touched the edges of this, and now it is worth stating plainly because of what it reveals about how deeply hope is built into us. Of all our capacities, hope is among the last to go. As the mind fails, whether through age, illness, or the slow unwinding at the very end of life, the faculties depart in a rough order. Memory often goes early, and language and the sharp edges of reasoning, but the capacity for hope, for leaning toward an expected good, for the lift of anticipation frequently persists long after these have dimmed. Those who attend the failing and the dying observe this consistently. Hope outlasts memory. It outlasts much of what we think of as the mind. It is among the last lights to go out. When something is the last to leave, it is telling us that this capacity sits closer to the core of us than almost anything else. Hope, then, is not some late or optional addition to a human being, a luxury laid on top of the essentials. It is near the very center, so deeply rooted that it remains when much else has gone. We are, it seems, hoping creatures all the way down, leaning toward tomorrow from the first days of life to very nearly the last. When a setback knocks two people down, what determines who gets up faster is often something neither of them is thinking about in the moment. It is whether their life had a direction to begin with. Researchers studying resilience find that people who carry a sense that their life is heading somewhere, that it has a direction or purpose, recover from setbacks measurably faster than those who feel their life is aimless. The reason connects to what we have seen throughout. A person with a direction has a future to reorient toward. The setback becomes a detour rather than a dead end, something that interrupted the journey rather than ended it. A person without that sense of direction has nothing to reorient toward, and so the setback can feel like the whole story collapsing, rather than one bad chapter in a longer one. This means that having a sense of where you are going is not only about reaching the destination, it is a kind of insurance against the falls along the way. You do not need certainty about your direction or a grand plan. Even a loose sense of heading somewhere gives the mind a place to recover toward when it is knocked down. The direction itself, however provisional, is part of what helps you rise. There are two moments each day when the human mind seems especially inclined to turn toward the future, and they sit at the day's two hinges, its dawn and its dusk. People across cultures have long noticed and marked these thresholds, the coming of light and its going, and there appears to be something in the mind that tilts toward reflection and forward-leaning feeling at exactly these turning points. The morning carries its particular sense of beginning of a day not yet spent and still full of possibility. The evening carries a different forward lean, the gathering of the day toward rest and the quiet anticipation of tomorrow. These transitional hours, when the world itself is turning, seem to invite the mind to turn with it toward what is coming. It is no accident that so many human rituals of hope, prayers, gratitudes, moments of reflection have gathered at dawn and dusk across the world's traditions. People sensed where the mind was most open. You might notice this in yourself, the particular quality of feeling at first light or at the day's close, a natural readiness to lean toward what lies ahead. These are not just times of day. They are doorways the mind opens on its own, and you can step through them gently toward hope. There is a quiet practice among people who help others through their darkest times, and it rests on a principle that may be one of the most beautiful things we know about hope. Hope can be held for someone who cannot hold it themselves. When a person has genuinely lost their own hope, those who work with them, therapists, friends, the steady people in their lives, often understand their task as holding the hope on that person's behalf, keeping it safe until the person can take it back up. The one in despair does not have to manufacture belief in their own future from nothing. Someone else can carry that belief for them, can say in effect, I will hold the hope that you cannot hold right now, and I will keep holding it until you are ready. And remarkably, this works. Borrowed hope can sustain a person across the stretch when their own is gone. This transforms what it means to help someone in despair. You do not have to make them feel hopeful. You have to be hopeful steadily on their behalf and let them lean on yours. If you are the one in the dark right now, unable to find any hope of your own, you may not need to find it. You may only need to let someone hold it for you and trust that it is being kept safe until the day you are ready to take it back. There is a curious imbalance in how hope responds to evidence. A vast weight of bad news can press a person down, and then one tiny sign of change can lift them out of all proportion to its actual size. A single green shoot pushing through scorched ground. One good test result after a string of bad ones. The first small sign that a hard situation is finally turning. These tiny pieces of evidence routinely restore hope far beyond what their literal size would justify. Researchers and clinicians notice this asymmetry, that hope can be rekindled by a sign almost trivially small, because what the small sign proves is not small at all. It proves that change in the right direction is possible, that the situation is not frozen, that the door is not fully closed. And that proof, however tiny its source, reopens the whole future. This is why it can be worth looking even in the worst stretches for the smallest sign that something is shifting. You are not looking for the problem to be solved. You are looking for evidence that solving is possible. One green shoot does not undo a drought, but it tells you the ground can still grow things, and sometimes that single fact is enough to let a person begin again. Here is a finding that runs against almost everything we assume about aging, and it is held up across study after study. The The very old are on the whole more hopeful and less afraid than people in midlife. You might expect hope to decline as the future shortens and losses accumulate, that the oldest among us would be the most fearful. The research consistently shows the reverse. Across populations, older people tend to report greater emotional well-being, more peace, more hope, and less fear than the middle-aged. Psychologists studying this find that as people sense their time growing shorter, they tend to focus more on what matters, release much of what once troubled them, and settle into a steadier and more hopeful relationship with life. The fear we project onto old age is largely not what the old themselves report feeling. This is genuinely good news about the road ahead, and it is worth letting it correct the picture so many of us carry of aging as a long slide into dread. The evidence suggests the opposite may await you, that the later years for most people bring not more fear but more peace, not less hope but more. The very people closest to the end report being least afraid of it. That is something to carry forward quietly into your own future. Sometimes hope arrives in a way that bypasses thinking entirely. A calm settles into the body, and only afterward does the mind catch up and find the reason for it. You may have felt this, a sudden easing in your chest, a loosening of the held tension, a quiet sense that things will be all right arriving before you could say why. Researchers studying emotion find that the body often registers a shift towards safety and hope before conscious awareness fully processes it. The nervous system reads cues, a tone of voice, a change in the situation, a sense of being held, and begins to calm in response, ahead of the mind's slower understanding. The reason comes later, if it comes at all. The body knew first. This is worth trusting more than we usually do. We tend to dismiss feelings that arrive without a clear reason, demanding that hope justify itself before we will accept it. But sometimes the body is simply ahead of the mind, reading something real that the reasoning self has not yet articulated. When a quiet calm settles into you for no reason, you can name, you do not always have to interrogate it. Sometimes the wiser response is to let it in and trust that your body has caught sight of something your thinking has not yet found the words for. Consider how much of what human beings do only makes sense if you assume a future they cannot actually be sure of. Nearly all our most meaningful acts rest on this quiet, unprovable bet. A person plants an orchard whose fruit will take years to come. Another saves for a retirement they may not live to enjoy. People raise children, build institutions, write laws, and tend causes whose payoff lies beyond any horizon they can guarantee. What makes all of this possible is hope, the willingness to act on behalf of a future you have no certainty of reaching. Researchers who study long-term human behavior note that this capacity to invest in an uncertain future sets much of human life apart. Without it, we would act only on what we could be sure of, and almost everything lasting that humans build would collapse. This means hope is not a private comfort tucked away inside us. It is one of the load-bearing structures of human civilization itself. Every long-term thing you have ever worked toward, every act of building or tending or saving was an act of hope, a wager on a tomorrow you could not be promised. We are a species that acts on behalf of futures we may never see. And that strange, unguaranteed reaching is responsible for very nearly everything we have made. We have explored hope in its dramatic forms, the survivor's fixed image, the rescue, the long endurance. But there is a quieter form, easy to overlook, that may be the most fundamental of all. It is simply staying. Sometimes, hope does not look like belief in any particular good outcome. It looks like nothing more than the decision to remain, to stay present for whatever comes next, to not give up and walk away from the unfolding of one's own life. Those who study people through their hardest passages recognize this as a real and sufficient form of hope, perhaps the bedrock one. The person may not be able to picture anything good ahead, but they choose to stay and see what happens, and that choosing to remain is itself an act of hope, the most stripped-down version there is. This matters enormously, because there are times when no brighter hope is available, when the future offers nothing specific to reach toward. And in those times, this quietest hope is still within reach. If all you can do today is stay, simply remain present for whatever comes next, that is not the absence of hope. That is hope in its most essential form, reduced to its core. To stay is already to hope. And on some days, choosing to stay is the whole of what hope asks, and the whole of what it needs. It is easy from a distance to lose hope in humanity, watching the worst of it stream past in the news. But something happens to that despair when a person has direct, close contact with actual human kindness. It tends to reverse. People who work closely with others in times of crisis, in hospitals, in disaster zones, in the ordinary intimacies of caregiving, frequently report that their hope for humanity grew rather than shrank through the experience. Seen up close in the particular people are revealed to be far kinder, more generous, and more willing to help than the abstract, distant view suggests. Researchers studying this distinction find that direct experience of others tends to restore faith in them, while distant, mediated impressions tend to erode it. The closer you get to actual human beings in their actual moments of difficulty, the more reason for hope you tend to find. This is worth knowing in an age when so much of our impression of humanity comes from a distance through screens filtered toward the alarming and the cruel. If your hope for the world has worn thin, the remedy may not be more information about how bad things are. It may be more direct contact with the people right around you, where human kindness is far more common than the distant view ever shows. Get close enough, and most people will give you reasons to hope again. We have seen how little hope needs to attach itself to a single date, one green shoot, a borrowed belief. Now the deeper version of that truth. The mind can rebuild hope from almost nothing at all. What is remarkable across all the study of human resilience is how slender an opening hope requires in order to begin growing back. Not a guarantee, not even good odds, just the faintest crack of possibility, the smallest sign that the future is not entirely closed. Given even that much, the mind will begin often on its own to rebuild. Researchers studying recovery from the deepest despair find this again and again, that hope does not need favorable conditions to restart. It needs only the barest opening, and from that thread it can over time reconstruct itself entirely. This is, in the end, one of the most reassuring things we know about being human. The conditions for hope's return are almost impossibly modest. Whatever has worn your hope down, the requirement for its return is far smaller than despair would have you believe. You do not need things to turn around. You do not need proof that they will. You need only the faintest opening, the smallest possibility that something might still come, and the mind, given even that, knows how to grow the rest back on its own. There is a lasting gift in every genuine experience of hope, one that outlives the moment itself. Once you have truly felt it, you have made it easier to feel again. Hope, like other deeply felt states, leaves a trace in the mind. A path that once walked becomes easier to find the next time. When a person has genuinely experienced, hope has felt that lean toward the future, and had it even once reward them, the brain lays down something that can be returned to. Researchers studying how emotional experience shapes the mind find that lived states become more accessible with each genuine experience of them. The hope you feel today is not only carrying you through today, it is quietly cutting a path you will be able to find again when you need it. This means none of the hope you have ever felt was wasted, even the hope that seemed at the time to lead nowhere. Every genuine experience of hope you have lived through has left a mark, a trace, a remembered way back. You have hoped before and survived, and that prior hoping is still in you, having made the path a little clearer. Hope gets easier to find each time you have truly found it. And you have found it before. You are not starting from nothing. We come now to something that gathers up much of what we have explored, a truth about where real peace actually comes from. It does not come from certainty. It comes from a hope that can hold without it. We often imagine that calm would arrive if only we could be certain everything will turn out well. But certainty of that kind is almost never available, and the wait for it leaves us anxious indefinitely. Those who have found a deep and durable calm in hard circumstances describe something different as its source, not the certainty that all will be well, but a hope steady enough to hold even without that certainty. A hope that has made its peace with the unknown, that reaches forward while accepting it cannot see the end. This, rather than guaranteed good outcomes, is what produces the deepest and most reliable calm. This is the quiet resolution of so much that we have touched. Hope was never meant to wait for certainty. It was built precisely for the space where certainty does not exist. The calm you may be seeking does not lie on the far side of knowing how things will turn out. It lies in a hope that no longer needs to know, that can hold the open question gently and reach forward anyway. That is the deepest peace available to a human being, and it asks not for certainty, only for hope. There is a simple, almost humble practice that quietly rebuilds hope in people, and it has been used knowingly and unknowingly for as long as humans have kept gardens and animals. You care for something living. When a person tends a plant, feeds an animal, keeps something alive that depends on them, hope tends to follow, and the reason is more than sentiment. To care for a living thing is to commit to its future, to water it tomorrow, to be there for its next need. Researchers studying well-being find that caring for living things measurably lifts mood and restores a sense of purpose and forward direction, because the living thing anchors you to a tomorrow. It must be tended again, and so you must still be here, still reaching forward to tend it. This is why a single plant on a windowsill can do real work for a person in a hard stretch far beyond what its small green presence would seem to warrant. The living thing gives your hope something concrete to attach to a future that needs you in it. If you are looking for a way back toward hope, this is among the oldest and gentlest. Care for something alive. Let its need for tomorrow give you a reason to still be reaching toward tomorrow yourself. In the depths of grief, when hope seems most impossibly far away, it has a way of returning that catches almost everyone by surprise. It comes back not when summoned, but on its own, in the most ordinary of moments. People moving through profound loss often describe the first return of hope, not as a decision they made, or a corner they consciously turned, but as something that arrived unbidden. A sudden, unexpected lift at the smell of coffee. A moment of genuine interest in something small. A flash of looking forward to an ordinary thing surprising them in the middle of their sorrow. Those who study grief recognize this, that hope tends to return early and on its own, slipping back in through ordinary moments, long before the grieving person feels ready or expects it. It does not wait for the grief to finish. It returns alongside it. This is one of the most quietly reassuring things to know if you are grieving or bracing too. You do not have to manufacture hope's return through effort. It tends to come back on its own in some small, ordinary moment you cannot schedule and would never predict, slipping in beside the grief while you are simply living through a regular day. You do not have to go looking for it. In time, in its own quiet way, it tends to come looking for you. Step back far enough, and a question arises about hope itself. Why do we have this capacity at all? The deepest answer reaches back across the whole span of our species. Hope appears to be something evolution itself built into us. The ability to imagine and reach toward a future, to act now on behalf of a tomorrow not yet arrived, confers profound survival advantages. The creature that can hope, can plan, persist through hardship, store food against winter, endure present difficulty for future gain, and refuse to give up when giving up would mean death. Researchers studying the evolution of human cognition increasingly see this forward-reaching capacity as central to how our ancestors survived. Hope in this view is not a fragile cultural luxury. It is a deep adaptation woven into how the human animal endures, refined across countless generations, because the ones who could hope were the ones who lived. This places hope alongside our most fundamental survival equipment, as essential as the instinct to seek food or flee danger. You come from an unbroken line of survivors, every one of whom carried this capacity to reach toward tomorrow. The hope you feel is not a modern invention or a pleasant accident. It is ancient, tested across the whole history of your species, and it is in you because it kept your ancestors alive. You were built to hope. We have traced hope through the brain and the bloodstream. There is a way it shows up in the body itself, a physical signature so consistent that people everywhere recognize it. When hope takes hold in a person, it tends to register physically in a recognizable way. the shoulders easing down from where fear had drawn them, the breath deepening the held tightness in the body, loosening a settling that others can often see from across a room. Researchers studying the bodily expression of emotion find that this physical signature of hope and relief is remarkably consistent across cultures recognized by people everywhere, regardless of language. We can see when hope has entered another person because it changes how they hold themselves, and we read that change without needing a single word. This is why hope can be communicated and received without speech, why a hopeful person's mere physical presence can steady others. It also means hope is not locked inside the privacy of the mind. It is written on the body in a language every human being can read. Eased shoulders and a deeper breath understood the world over. When hope settles into you, it shows. And when you see it settle into someone else, some older part of you knows exactly what you are looking at. There is a particular strength to the hope that grows in people who have already lost something and had it return. That experience seems to root hope more deeply than an unbroken life ever could. People who have lost something they loved, a relationship, a health, a way of life, and then found it or something like it return to them, often carry a hope of unusual durability afterward. The lived experience of recovery, of having something precious come back after it was gone, becomes evidence the mind can draw on, proof that loss is not always final, that what is gone can return. Those who study post-traumatic growth find that people who have survived loss and recovery frequently emerge with a hope steadier and deeper than they held before, because their hope now rests on something they have actually lived, through not merely believed. This casts past losses in a different light. The hardest things you have survived and recovered from were not only wounds, they were also quietly the building of a sturdier hope. If you have ever lost something and watched it, or it's like come back to you, you carry proof that the future can restore what the present takes away. That proof is now part of you, making your hope harder to shake than it could ever have been without the loss. What you survived did not only cost you, it also left you stronger in the one capacity that matters most when things fall apart. We return near the end to the bond between hope and love, because everything we have explored keeps leading back to it. The deepest hope a person ever holds is so often hope for someone they love. We saw earlier that hope and love share much of the same ground in us, drawing on overlapping reserves. Here, near the close, it is worth letting that truth settle fully. The fiercest, most durable hope most people ever feel is not for themselves but for those they love. A child's future, a partner's recovery, the well-being of someone whose life matters more to them than their own. Love generates this hope almost without effort, and the hope born of love proves stronger than nearly any other kind, capable of sustaining a person through what they could not survive for their own sake alone. This is, in a sense, the secret woven through this entire exploration. The surest way to a hope that does not break is to love something beyond yourself. Think of who and what you love most. There, in those bonds, lies the deepest reservoir of hope you have, stronger than any hope you could generate for yourself in isolation. We are not built to hope alone, sealed inside our own futures. We hope most powerfully through our loves, reaching toward tomorrow on behalf of those we cannot bear to lose. And that perhaps is hope at its truest. We touched this truth earlier, and as we near the end, it deepens into something worth meeting again from a different side. Hope often reaches the body before it reaches our understanding. There is a particular experience many people know but rarely name, a quiet calm settling into them in the middle of a hard time, an easing they cannot account for, a sense that something has shifted before anything in their circumstances has actually changed. The body relaxes its guard. The breath comes a little easier, and only later, if at all, does the mind find words for why. Researchers studying how emotion moves through us find that the body frequently registers a turn towards safety and hope ahead of conscious thought, the nervous system reading something real before the reasoning self can name it. The lesson deepened now is about trust. We are trained to distrust what we cannot explain, to demand that a feeling justify itself before we will let it in. But the body is not foolish. When a calm arrives in you without a reason you can name, it may be that something true has been sensed below the level of words. You do not always have to understand why hope has come in order to let it stay. Sometimes the body finds the way before the mind, and the wiser response is simply to follow. When survivors of the most extreme situations look back and try to recall what was in their minds, at the very worst moment, a striking pattern emerges. So often it was not fear, it was a plan for afterward. People who have come through disasters, accidents, and ordeals that nearly ended them frequently report that their final clear thought, at the edge of everything, was not terror, but something forward-looking, a plan for what they would do when it was over, the meal they would eat, the person they would call, the first thing they would do once they were through. Those who study survival find this oriented toward after-thinking appearing again and again in survivors' accounts, and they suspect it is not incidental. The mind that even at the brink was busy planning for after was a mind that had not surrendered the future, and that refusal to surrender it may be part of what kept the person alive to plan. There is something profound in this. At the moment when fear would seem most justified, the surviving mind so often turns instead to tomorrow. It suggests that the instinct to plan for after, to assume there will be an after worth planning for, runs deeper in us than fear itself. Even at the edge, a part of us keeps building the future. And sometimes, that quiet insistence on an after is exactly what carries a person to one. There is a mercy built into hope that people in their most depleted moments rarely realize. Hope does not require energy you do not have. It is quiet enough to live alongside complete exhaustion. When a person is utterly worn out, drained past the point of being able to summon any active effort, they often believe hope is beyond them too, that it would take a strength they simply do not have. But hope at its core is not effortful. It is not the same as forced positivity or the labor of cheering oneself up, which genuinely do require energy, the exhausted lack. Real hope is quieter than that. It is the faint, low lean toward tomorrow that can persist even in someone with nothing left, asking for no strength, no performance, no manufactured brightness. It coexists peacefully with exhaustion, requiring nothing the depleted person cannot give. This matters because exhausted people so often abandon hope under the mistaken belief that they are too tired to hold it. But you are never too tired to hope, because true hope asks nothing of your reserves. It is not one more demand on a depleted self. It is the quiet thing that remains when all the effortful things have fallen away, the faint lean toward tomorrow that needs no energy at all. Even at your most worn out, that much is still available to you. We have followed hope to its smallest forms, and here is perhaps the smallest and most sufficient of all, the hope simply to see one more ordinary morning. And it turns out that can be enough to carry a whole life forward. People in the hardest stretches of life, when every larger hope has fallen away, often find that what keeps them going has narrowed to something almost unbearably simple. The wish to wake and see one more ordinary day, one more morning light through the window, one more cup of coffee, one more sky. Those who have walked others through their darkest passages know that this minimal hope, the desire to witness just one more plain and ordinary morning, is frequently enough to sustain a person through the night, and then the next, and then onward. The smallness of it is not a failure of hope. It is hope distilled to its irreducible core. There is profound dignity in this, and profound reassurance. You do not need a grand reason to continue. The wish to see one more ordinary morning is a complete and sufficient hope enough on its own to carry a person through. And ordinary mornings, unlike grand futures, are nearly always available, arriving again and again with quiet reliability. If all you can hope for tonight is to wake and see tomorrow's light that is not too little, that has carried countless people through, one ordinary morning at a time, all the way to the far side of what they thought they could not survive. As we draw toward the close, this truth gathers up so much of what we have explored. Hope needs astonishingly little to survive. Only the smallest opening, the faintest crack through which something might still come. Across everything we have traced the brain that builds a future in total darkness, the mind that rebuilds hope from almost nothing, the green shoot that restores belief out of all proportion to its size. One quality of hope keeps appearing. It survives on remarkably little. It does not require good odds or proof or even a clear reason. It requires only that the door not be entirely closed, only the smallest crack through which something, anything might still arrive. Given that much, hope persists, and from that much it can grow back to fill a life. This is why hope is so nearly impossible to fully extinguish in a human being, and why it has carried our species through every darkness we have ever faced. Whatever you are living through, however closed the future may feel, the requirement for hope to survive is smaller than you think. Not certainty, not good news, not even a reason. Only the smallest crack, the faintest possibility that something might still come. And almost always, even in the hardest places, that much remains. The door is rarely closed completely. And through even the smallest opening, hope knows how to keep coming. We close the body of this exploration, where it can do you the most good, with the truth that nothing you have ever hoped was wasted. Each genuine hope you have felt has made the next one easier to find. We touched this earlier, and it belongs here at the end, fully felt. Every real experience of hope leaves a trace, cuts a path that the mind can find again. The hope that carried you through something years ago did not vanish when the moment passed. It left a mark, a remembered way, a route back. And so the hope available to you now is not the first hope you have ever had to build from scratch. It rests on every prior hoping you have lived through and survived. Each one made the path a little clearer, the way back a little easier to find. This means you are far better equipped to hope than you may feel. You have done this before many times, and every time left something behind in you that remains. Whatever you are facing, you are not a beginner at hope. You have hoped before through things that felt impossible at the time, and come out the other side. That experience is still in you, having quietly worn a path toward hope that you can walk again. You know the way, even when it does not feel like it. You have been here before, and you found your way through. You will find it again. As we arrive at the final stretch, this truth returns to gather the others, because it is where all of this has quietly been leading. The deepest peace a person can hold does not come from knowing how things will turn out. It comes from a hope that no longer needs to know. Across everything we have explored, a single shape keeps emerging. Hope was never built to wait for certainty. It does its truest work precisely where certainty is absent, in the open space where the outcome cannot be seen. And the people who have found a durable calm in the hardest circumstances did not find it by finally becoming sure that all would be well. They found it in a hope that had made its peace with not knowing, a hope steady enough to hold the open question gently and reach forward anyway. This, and not guaranteed good outcomes, is the source of the deepest and most reliable calm available to a human being. It is a quiet relief to set down the demand for certainty that we so often think we need before we can rest. You do not have to know that everything will be all right in order to be at peace. That knowledge was never available to anyone, and waiting for it only prolongs the unrest. The calm you may be reaching for lies instead in a hope that can hold without certainty, reaching forward into the unknown with steadiness rather than dread. That is the deepest peace there is, and it has never once required you to be sure. There is a lesson that comes from those at the very end of their lives, gathered by the people who sit with them in their final days, and it speaks directly to how we might live the rest of ours. The regrets of the dying are rarely about hopes that went unfulfilled. They are about hopes never dared. People who spend time with the dying, recording what they say they wish they had done differently, find a consistent pattern. Almost no one at the end regrets having hoped for something that did not come to pass. The regrets cluster instead around the hopes never reached for at all, the dreams set aside out of fear or caution, the futures never even attempted. It is not the hoped-for things that were missed that haunt people at the close of life. It is the hoping itself that was withheld, the chances not taken, the reaching never risked. This reframes the whole question of whether hope is worth the risk of disappointment. We so often hold back from hoping to protect ourselves from the pain of it not working out. But the testimony of those at the end suggests we have the risk backward. The disappointment of a hope that did not come true fades. What lingers, what is regretted across a whole life, is the hope a person was too afraid to feel at all. So reach for things. Hope for them openly, even knowing they may not come. At the end, it is not the missed hopes you will regret. It is the ones you never let yourself have. Near the very end now, this truth returns one final time, because it may be the single most important thing to carry away from all of this. Hope survives on almost nothing. It needs only the smallest opening, and almost always that much remains. We have followed hope through the brain and the body, through grief and survival, through childhood and old age, and the failing mind, and one quality has appeared in every place we looked. Hope requires astonishingly little to persist. Not certainty, not good odds, not proof, not even a clear reason. Only the faintest possibility that something might still come. The smallest crack left in the door. And because the door is so rarely closed completely, because in even the hardest places, some small opening almost always remains hope, almost always has the little it needs to survive, and from that little to grow. This is why hope has carried human beings through every darkness we have ever known, and why it can carry you. Whatever you are facing, the opening hope needs is smaller than your fear is telling you, and more likely to be there than you can presently feel. You do not need the way to be clear. You need only the faintest crack of possibility, and through even that hope knows how to keep coming. It has come through smaller openings than the one in front of you now. It will find this one too. And so we come to the last and quietest truth of all, the one that holds everything else. After all the science, all the survival, all the reaching hope turns out to be something simpler than a belief about what is coming. It is a way of being present here now, open to whatever the future brings. We tend to think of hope as a prediction, a confident bet that good things lie ahead. But everything we have explored points somewhere gentler. Hope at its deepest is not really about being certain of a particular outcome at all. It is a posture toward existence itself, a way of remaining open rather than closed, of staying turned toward life rather than away from it. It is less a forecast about tomorrow than a way of meeting this present moment with the door still open, willing to receive whatever comes. Held this way, hope is not something you have to be right about. It is simply a way of being here. This is the resolution of everything we have touched. Hope was never the demand that the future be good. It was always the willingness to remain open to it, whatever it holds. And that willingness is available to you in this very moment, regardless of what you can or cannot see ahead. To hope is not to know that all will be well. It is to stay open here now, turn toward the life still unfolding in front of you, the door left quietly ajar. That openness is the whole of it. And it has been within your reach this entire time. We have traveled a long way together through this single, quiet subject, and I hope something in it has settled into you and found a place to rest. We began with hope as a measurable thing built of pathways and agency, and we end with it as something simpler and larger, a way of remaining open to a future none of us can see. Along the way, we found that hope reaches into the body, slowing the heart, easing the stress, speeding the healing of wounds, persisting in the failing mind long after so much else has gone. We found that it survives on almost nothing, that it can be borrowed and held and passed forward, that it returns in the morning and after grief, and even after it has been deliberately broken. We found that it lives most powerfully in our loves, and that it asks for no energy we do not have. If there is one thread to carry away, let it be this. You are not a beginner at hope. You come from an unbroken line of people who survived by reaching toward tomorrow, and you have hoped before through things that once felt impossible and found your way through. That capacity is still in you, rooted deeper than memory, asking only the smallest opening to begin again. Whatever you are facing tonight, the door is rarely closed completely. And through even the smallest crack, hope knows how to keep coming. It has carried our whole species through every darkness we have ever known. It can carry you. Thank you for spending this time here with me. Good night.